Hey, so during this episode, I want to talk about what happens when you have a group that doesn't talk. Um, it could be that your group is less talkative than other groups. And every group is going to be different. There are some people who are more introverted and some people who are more extroverted. You have some people for whom speaking in a public setting, and public being just in front of more than two or three people, brings them somewhat of a social anxiety. And they kind of freak out. They don't like to think on their feet in particular in those types of settings. So how do you handle this? Well, overall, I'd say one of the best ways to handle this is to give them an idea of where you're going well in advance so that they have time to process and think ahead of time. Sometimes the issue is not necessarily that they can't talk or they don't want to talk, but they don't like the idea of thinking on their feet. If they had time to prepare something, if they had time to think through their answers ahead of time, they might be able to provide some answers and feel comfortable with that. And so if you can get them the questions ahead of time, maybe you're doing a book study that has, questions at the end of each chapter. And so already that if they've done their study, that they have answered, those 4 or 5 questions. And so that can be something you discuss and you talk about. And they're more likely to participate if they've had time to think about that on their own. You could even have them read their answers. And a really good way to start getting into some of those discussions is for you as the leader to start off. Hey, here's what we're going to do. I'm going to read, what I wrote down for the answer to question number 2 here. And let's just go around the room and have everybody read what they said. Now, what that does, that gets everybody participating. You might pass your extrovert and they just read their answer, and then you go on and several other people later, and then your introvert is able to read their answer, and it feels no different. It feels okay. It feels safe because they've previously thought about it. They have it written down. It's very easy to read their answer. Now, that's one strategy. And in fact, I would say that's probably the best one, is to give them a heads up ahead of time of where you're going so that they have time to think about it. Now, it could be that you have people in your group who rather than having kind of social anxiety or fear of speaking in front of people, they're just less talkative, and they do talk, or they would talk if kind of called upon, but they would much rather just watch everybody else. They'd much rather just listen. So for these types of people, it's really good to go ahead and engage them, ask them questions. And so it could be, again, you don't want to do, if the person has kind of that fearful social anxiety, they're really timid, this is not the solution for them, okay? But if it's the person who rather is just kind of like, they're a little bit passive and they don't really want to necessarily engage in conversation, but they're fine with talking, but they just usually don't, well, then engage them. Ask them the question. Hey, Mark, what did you think about this question? How did you think about, how this all turned out? Or, whatever the question might be, and you're engaging that individual. I found it helpful often to go around and actually have everybody share something, if it works that way. Again, heads up time for the people who are going to need that. You let them answer last. But then, you engage every individual. So then everybody's participating, everybody's putting in a little bit. And sometimes, we don't like those like short answer questions, everybody gives like a 1-word answer. But sometimes those are good for some of those scenarios where you just need a little bit of participation from everybody, so that you can jump into a larger discussion, but just gets everybody kind of initially talking and putting their 2 cents out. So those are just a couple of ideas on that. Another solution would be that you actually group people into smaller groups where people can feel a little bit more comfortable talking. So it could be you go through your list of questions and you say, hey, why don't you 3 get together and you guys deal with questions 1 and 2, talk through that and come up with a really good answer for the whole group. Okay. And then you 3, you guys are going to take questions, 4 and 5, and you guys are going to think through those questions, come up with a really good answer. And then we're going to, us 4 over here, we're going to take, questions 6, 7, and 8, and we're going to do the same thing. Whatever it is that you're doing, that gives them a smaller group to talk with and work through some of those questions. And then they're able to come up and they can kind of pick who's going to be the vocal person from it within that group. Once again, you're getting everybody participating and helping everybody talk. So those are just some ideas. You might have some ideas as well. I'd be glad to hear what those are. Please share those with me. How do you get people talking within your group?